Assalamualaikum, I am A19119 Muhammad Iqmal Haikal bin Rahim. Today I will present about the experiment that have been done by my group. First of all, I will explain the abstract of this experiment. Bernoulli concepts are still used today to calculate the pressure around a fluid moving at a certain speed. A flowing fluid condition is classified using static head, dynamic head and elevation calculation. The Bernoulli equation which contain the explanation for the principle in this experiment. 1. We will do the experiment to demonstrate Ludwig Franz boundary layer effect theorem. To begin, we have investigated the variation of total pressure head, static head and dynamic head. The pitot tube on the right side of the instrument is used to evaluate the total pressure. The static head is measured using the multi-tube manometer at the top of the apparatus. Venturi mechanism carries the static and dynamic head. At the specific rate, static head and total head are measured at all 9 points within the venturi. The flow rate is then determined using the volumetric tank. The volumetric tank and the dynamic head may both be used to determine fluid velocity at all 9 points within the venturi. The Bernoulli formula was used to determine the sample calculation shown in the result. Graph of static, dynamic and total head against flow rate and position have been produced using the data received as a consequence. Each graph was created to highlight the output curve of various flow rates. According to Bernoulli theory, strength is inversely proportional to velocity. Finally, we must confirm that it follows Bernoulli theorem as stated in the experiment. So now, this is a background of this experiment. Daniel Bernoulli developed Bernoulli's principle, which states that as fluid velocity increase, its internal pressure decrease. The mathematical technique for comprehending the physics of fluid is Bernoulli theorem. According to Bernoulli's principle, the pressure around a fluid flowing at the specific velocity will be reduced. It connected the kinetic energy of a fluid moving through a tube, the pressure and the gravitational potential energy. Because of the high velocity flow through the restriction, kinetic energy will be used more frequently at the price of pressure energy. We are required to investigate the change of total pressure head, static head and dynamic head. In this experiment, static head and total head are measured at all 9 points within the venturi at any given flow rate. The volumetric tank is then used to measure the flow rate. The velocity of fluid at each of the ventury's 9 points may be determined using both the volumetric tank and the dynamic head. Last from me, I want to tell about our group objectives for this experiment. First, to determine the flow rate through the volumetric tank. The second, to measure static and total head at all seat position within the venturi. And lastly, to investigate the validity of the Bernoulli equation when applied to a steady flow. So, that's all from me. Thank you.
Very good day, my name is Dineshwaran Gunasekaran and my metric ID is MA19091. So now I would like to continue the presentation for today. So now I'll continue with the literature review of the Bernoulli principle experiment. So basically, Bernoulli principle is named after a scientist known as Daniel Bernoulli. So Daniel Bernoulli is the one who derived Bernoulli principle and the equation for Bernoulli principle. So Daniel Bernoulli tested this theory by puncturing a small open-ended straw through a pipe. This is the way he derived Bernoulli principle, and through this outcome he drew a finding that the height to which the fluid rose up the straw was correlated to fluid's pressure. So he related that velocity and pressure had a relation. So now I will explain the relation. So in Bernoulli's principle, so basically Bernoulli's principle tenders understanding that increase velocity, decrease pressure. So this is Bernoulli principle in basic. So this is what Bernoulli derived. So I will explain more deeper. Bernoulli's principle states that an increase in the speed of a moving fluid occurs simultaneously with the decrease in surrounding pressure. So why I'm using fluid now? Of course, this is a fluid lab, so that's why I derived the definition using fluid. So Bernoulli said that increase in the speed of a moving fluid, the pressure around the fluid decreases. So this is basically Bernoulli's principle through fluid flow. So now Bernoulli's principle is valid for any fluid. So within a horizontal of fluid, points of higher fluid speed will have lesser pressure points compared to slower fluid speed. So this is basically what we derived from lab experiment 1. So now Bernoulli's equation, the formula of Bernoulli's principle is given as follows. So this is Bernoulli's equation. So Bernoulli derived this equation through the principle of conservation of energy. So Bernoulli analyzed this and derived this equation through this principle. So he related the relationship between pressure, velocity and elevation, which is known as H, to derive Bernoulli's equation. So but in this equation, the elevation is written as Z.
My name is Muhammad Hidayat Zulkifli. I will be presenting for the metallurgy. Okay. The first thing I will present is the apparatus and experimental setup that we use in our experiment. Okay. The apparatuses that we use in this experiment is A is the manometer valve for static reading, B is the manometer valve for the pipette reading, C is the manometer tube, D is the pipette reading, E is the static reading, F is the water inlet pipe, G is the water inlet valve, H is the test section, I is the water outlet valve, and J is the outlet pipe. This is the apparatus that we use, which is in the lower section of the table. The apparatus is K, the pump switch button, L, the pump valve, M, flow rate reading. This is how the experiment setup look in our experiment, where this section, the upper section, is on top of this table. Okay. So next is the procedure for the experiment. The air from the system need to be expelled first before starting the experiment using the following steps. First, fully open the pump valve and close the water inlet and open the valve for manometer, static and pipette reading. Okay. Close the water outlet valve so the water does not go out. Okay. Start the pump and slowly opening the water inlet in order to push out the air through the manometer static reading and manometer pipette reading valves. When the air is fully pushed out of the manometer tube, close the water inlet valve and the reading manometer valve and stop the pump. Okay. Next, open the reading manometer valve slowly to allow the air to go back into the manometer tube until at least half of the reading and close it back. Adjust the pump valve to a position that could only enable little flow through and fully open the water inlet valve. Next, the pump is started and the water will flow through the manometer tube. Open half of the water outlet valve and the water will flow to the outlet pipe. Okay. Open the manometer's valve, which is the A and B. Adjust the outlet valve so that all the readings in the manometer can be taken. Okay. Record the data of all static head in the manometer tube and the pipette tube. The brass pipe is adjusted to the specific point to measure total pressure at specific location. Close the water hole and measure the flow rate using a stopwatch. The outlet valve is adjusted to another different position to get readings for different flow rate.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Aiman Arif and my number ID is MA19050. Today I'm here to present to you all about the result for the experiment 1, that is Bernoulli principle. Okay, first we go to the raw data that we have from the experiment, that is 0.123456, and we have the data for the static head and the pipette head. And then we go to the formula that we use in the experiment, that is flow rate, dynamic head, and we measure and we calculate. And from the formula we got the table that is calculated. We got for the hash dynamic, we measure we got the V calculate, and we got the flow rate. And for the diameter for the experiment, we got from the lab, that is 26, 16, 26, and we got 51.90. And also we got the area for the apparatus. And then from the table that we have calculate, we got the data. Okay, we plot the data for the static and pivot head. We got this graph, and then we go to the velocity measure versus point for the piezometry. We got this graph, and then we go to the V calculated with point of piezometric, and we got this data.
Hello everyone, my name is Madhavan Sanam Sivaraman, Metric ID MA19090. Today I would like to talk about the discussion part of our first experiment, which is Bernoulli's principle. So let us look on the question and answers. First question, why is there a difference between V measured and V calculated? The difference between V measured and V calculated is due to the factor of random error in the measurement resulting from minor changes in an instrument, first of all, surrounding disturbance, secondly, or the way a measure is read that does not show consistent readings. Furthermore, we can also say that the value measured is different slightly due to the parallax error. Second question, what conclusion can be made of the variation of static head and dynamic head throughout the 6 positions according to the V calculated at those positions? So the answer is the static head actually reduces to the middle position and upswing from after middle position till the last position. Besides that, the dynamic head rises to the middle position. This actually indicates when a fluid pipe pressure decreases as the area decreases for a spot we measured. If a small section of the fluid flow tube decreases, thus the flow velocity increases with decreasing in the pressure. The final question, what conclusion can be made from the finding of static head and dynamic head in opposed to the total head as well as equation 1? The answer is the whole dynamic head must be studied when determining the actual size of the pumping equipment to be installed. Head static is calculated while the fluid is static, whereas head dynamic is calculated while the fluid is flowing. Hence, the head static and dynamic are dependent on the flow pressure of the fluid. So let us look on the analysis of this experiment, which is based on the computation fluid dynamic subject. So first of all, for this experiment, we should have come out with an analysis from the CFD, where this course helps us to analyze the fluid flow along the Venturi structure design. As we can see, we successfully draw the Venturi design for the step 1, and then we should create this design according to the Venturi model dimension by applying a revolve feature. For the second step, after successfully designing the 3D model, the boundaries such as inlet, outlet and walls should be applied before run the mesh for the model as follows. For the third step, we need to find a suitable meshing size. So for this experiment, we actually selected 7 mm, which is chosen to undergo a meshing run where it gives us the precise results. Finally, after meshing procedure, modeling for the Venturi model such as pressure, base and resistance transient will be selected. Furthermore, retain the current details in boundaries for Venturi. In this scenario, velocity will be set for 3 direction XYZ since it's 3D, and gauge pressure set for 0 as example. As further, after all settings have been made, a solution step will be run to get results where a graph of computing actually running through where it gives us contours and vectors for pressures and velocity finally. So these are the results we obtained from the analysis. First of all, we can see for the results of contours of static pressure, Pascal, and also contours of velocity magnitude, meter per second. And for the vector, we can see for the velocity vector for static pressure, Pascal, and also velocity vectors for the velocity magnitude meter per second. So now let us look on the conclusion part of this experiment. Following the completion of this experiment, we understood the pressure with velocity relationship for fluid moving through a venturi. For the theory, we can acknowledge that when the pressure was at low point, the fluid was elevated, and vice versa when the pressure was above average. This is related to Bernoulli's theory, where high pressure leads to the decreasing manner in velocity trend. Besides that, experimental research on the sizing of cross-section areas proved that this factor affects pressure and velocity quantity. We all know that throughout the fluid flow, there are energy losses due to fluid friction theoretically. Aside from that, the experiment's objectives are achieved as Bernoulli's principle is understood precisely, and we can say that there exists tolerance in experimental values due to parallax error, and countermeasures is actually needed for accurate experimental results in the future. Furthermore, for analysis, our group had done a 3D model for the fluid flowing along the venturi by considering the diameters and boundaries that were needed so that the experimental findings can be seen. So that's all from me. Thank you.